Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So, it's good to be here, away from my pajamas and flip-flops. I take that back. Well, today, though, on a more serious note, I'd like to talk a bit about the beginning, the middle, and the end. More the beginning and the middle, because we don't know too much about the end at this moment, only because we didn't experience it yet. You know, for as long as I can remember, and you guys can probably attest to this as well, we talk about end times. We talk about it in a sense that it's really near. And, you know, when I was growing up as a child, I used to hear the same comments being made about, you know, you can tell that end time is near based on all the craziness that's going on in the world. Well, it's still going on, and you know, it's not getting any better. So I can't do too much about the end times at the moment, but, you know, one day we'll know those details. You know, there's been predictions and prophecies based on the end times. And that being said, you know, the prophets like Daniel and Isiah even would talk about how things were going to happen, how things are going to be. But reality shows us that they expressed it in a vision, whatever that vision was, because they know that something's going to happen. But when they talked to the people, when they wrote this down, it was years before Christ was born even. So they could only understand as much as their era allowed them to understand in their explanation, right? And even when we speak of things, we are only limited to the dimensions that we can understand as humans, because there's so much more to God than we can even start to explain. So, you know, on days that we go out and work, I'm going to put a twist on this, because we know that the Pentecost is coming up tomorrow, and I don't want to step on any sermon that might come up above that. And the reason I want to put a twist to it, though, is because this is what it's all about anyway, right? We get up in the mornings, we watch the sunrise if we do that, and in doing that, we start our routine. It's almost like clockwork, if you will. You wake up, I'll use my own example, wake up before the sunrise, get a cup of coffee, do whatever I do. And then, you know, I try to take a moment and look out of my window, my den window, and watch the squirrels scurry around and some of the birds, the woodpeckers, sitting in the yard eating. But the sun comes up as a light, a bright light. It brings life, if you will, to the rest of your day. When the sun comes up, we, somewhere in the early morning, decide that we need to go to work, in most cases, right? We get out, and I just explained that I like to watch the daylight come up. So some of us will get up at dark also. They will do whatever they need to do. We do what we need to do to get ready for our day. We go about our day, and we may never notice or think about the fact that the sun rose that day, because we're so focused on trying to do what we need to do that's part of our routine. And, you know, you go throughout your day, you come home after work. For the most part, if you're fortunate enough to get home before dark, you either watch the sunset or you don't. Most of us are too tired, or if it's dark, we don't even pay attention to it. And, you know, that sun went from the east to the west over a 12, 13-hour maybe period that whole day. And the next thing you know, you're having conversations with people saying, you know, I wonder where the year went. Where did it go? You didn't think about the sunrise. If you counted the sunrise every day for 365 days, it would be a different thought process, because now you're aware. You're aware of everything that's going on in life, and that's part of life. Where am I going with this? Well, throughout the day, when we're doing our activities and we're focusing on our responsibilities, we even start to think about the next day. What are we going to do tomorrow to make that day better? But then we've taken for granted, if we don't really think about the awareness of the day. Yesterday, we did the same thing that we're going to do today, and we're going to do the same thing tomorrow that we're going to do today, right? So where's the day going? The light. We notice the daylight. And then when the dark comes, sometimes we don't even notice that. We're so glad to get into our scenarios where we can relax and calm down so we can jump up and do the same thing tomorrow, that we tend to just sleep it off. Now, the thing I like to talk about that has nothing to do with what I just said is my title of my sermon, and that's Let's Keep the Light On. It has something to do with it, I won't say that. When you read from the book of Genesis, you try to grasp the concept of how God created the heavens and the earth, right? Specifically, it mentions how he separated the light from the dark. And I'll go there temporarily for a quick read. Genesis 1, I'm going to read, start at the very first verse chapter, Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and I'm reading from the New International Version. The earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now, in verse 3 it says, and God said, let there be light. And there was light. So the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. Now, there was nothing mentioned as to whether it was already light, because he did say, let there be light. So his Spirit was all over. And then there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. So, evening and morning, all of these things came into play after the first day of creation. There was light, right? So, and I'm going to get more deeper into the light, because the 7 days of creation goes into great depth of, we tend to focus throughout our studies and reading and understanding, in some form or another, each day in God's creation. Pick a day, and then you can go through and see what you're focused on. See where your focus is. A lot of people don't look at it in that way, because, when we talk about light, and then the second day, what did he do? Then the third day, what did he do? When you compartmentalize it, we have different thought patterns from different people, picking different days, if you will, out of all the days of his creation. I'm going to talk about the first day. I'm going to talk about light. And then I'm going to try and do a correlation between the light that he created the first day from the Old Testament perspective to the light that we talk about today from the New Testament perspective. Because when he created light, he was already there. And he created that light for us. Now, I'm gonna throw a twist in this in a minute. That's why I'm saying light. But the days that he created light from a physical aspect, we once again reference that light throughout the Bible, and, and you'll see the transition of light from Genesis to the transition starting in John, all of the books of the New Testament authors, and I'll go over some of those. So now let's look at that correlation from the light in Genesis to the New Testament. Let's look at it in John. I'm going to go to John 1, verses 1 through 3. I went to Genesis 1, 1, 2, 3 initially. Now let's look at it in John 1, 1 through 3. In the beginning was the Word. The Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. Okay? Now, think about that. In the beginning, I read Genesis. In the beginning, God was hovering over the earth, and he created light. Jumping back to John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. So as we continue to develop our relationship with God and God's family, we start to understand that we are a reflection of that light that Jesus was. It's radiating from him. So now we are a reflection of that. And I'll get into that in more detail in a minute, because we're talking about light first. We talked about light physically the first day, and physically light. So we can only reflect the light because Jesus is the only true light. Now, what do I mean? Let's go to John 1 again, and I'm going to start in verse 6. Read verse 6 through verse 8. And it says, there were a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. So in some context, we can look at witnessing the light as reflecting that light that comes from Christ, right? Now, as we go throughout our daily routines and interact with others, we may not, others may not understand God's way. So what is our responsibility? And I can't say it's a responsibility, because when you are reflecting light, you're not looking at it as a responsibility. You're just doing it, right? So I have to put words around it so we understand it, right? So when we are with people that doesn't know God's way, and we know God's way, we are supposedly reflecting that light that we've been exposed to, if you will. So we must be able to exercise patience and understanding of those who doesn't understand, because it would come automatic, right? If you were able to just live. If you're living and you're living for God, you're already doing what I just mentioned. Now, we must also stand strong in what we believe, so that light that we're reflecting to others can bring them out of the darkness. And I'm going to do a correlation with darkness also. Bugs, and I'm not calling people bugs, but as everyone might know, when there's darkness, what happens? When you're driving down the highway, the bugs are attracted to your headlights, and you can tell there's a physical image that things are attracted to light. Now, if we are in darkness, and there was darkness, the light that was propagated or shined upon us was already there, and we came out of darkness to get to that light. So we'll talk about that as well, and I'll talk about that in more detail also. So in order to see what is done in the dark, you cannot see in the dark if you're already in the dark. So darkness is a lack of knowing, or an unknowing, if you will. But once you see light, you're attracted to it, and you tend to want to come out of the darkness if you have the intentions that would be of light. I'll just put it that way for now, and then we'll go into it in some more detail, because if you're in the darkness, you can't see anything, so that means you're blind, right? I mean, that's what that is. It's a blindness, and if you get caught in the darkness, there's going to be a point in time where that light is going to shine on you. Now, it's up to you to go to it. So if you're stuck in that darkness, is it something that you are comfortable with, or you prefer to stay in there because there's intentions within you that you don't want to shine? Well, let's go to John. Let's go to John 12. I'm going to read starting in verse 45, John 12, verse 45. The one who looks at me is seeing the one who sent me. I have come into the world as a light, so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. Right? So that's verse 45. If anyone hears my words but does not keep them, I do not judge that person. For I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. So that's a choice, right? Christ said to us, hey, I'm the light. You can choose to come to me or not. Okay? He didn't say that if you don't come to me, you're going to stay in darkness, and I'm going to make sure you stay there. We all have choices, and we all, if we are of the understanding that the light is good, as it said in Genesis, he saw that it was good, then we want to go there, right? And not only should we be a light to others when as we seek that light, we should also be, how do I say it? So light is light. You can't help from shining or reflecting light if you're part of it. That's just straight in how it is. But we as a church or an assembly of God's people should be building a foundation based on that light. And that foundation should be mature. It should be spiritually sensitive to others, and it should be doctrinally sound. And I'll go into that just right now in 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 12 through 15. If anyone builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. Now, if what has been built survives, the builder will receive a reward. If it burned up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved. So even though only as one escaping through the flames, I'll finish that. Even though as one only as one escaping through the flames. So this was Paul's explanation of building on a foundation, and everything he mentioned here is physical: gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, straw. You know, if there's a fire, course, everything is going to burn. And, depending on how long and how hot that fire is, nothing will survive. But the builder of those physical things would still be saved, because it's not about the gold, silver, costly stones, wood, or hay, right? So what was Paul saying in his message? Basically, being part of God's family is most priceless. It's the most priceless gift, and it is a gift which every Christian has been granted. It's a Christian's choice to go to become part of God's family, because it's out there. We just have to make the choice. And after coming to Christ, we need to be careful regarding what we place on a divine foundation. We could put gold, build it up with gold. We could build it up with silver, but gold and silver and costly stones might be spiritually durable things, if you will. These things have not come from us, though. They came from God, but they still counted in our favor on that great day of God's return and Christ's return. So technology is so what I'm trying to say basically here is how we build our foundation, and I'm looking at it physically, and let's talk about it spiritually as well. So you would think that if you're building something physically, gold, silver, and those type things will hold longer than straw or wood or whatever. Now, let's compare that once again to spiritual foundation. If you build things that include faith, Christian love, and service, these are the things that the spiritual gifts that we acquire as part of the spiritual foundation for God's family. So verse 15 that I just mentioned in Corinthians, I'll read it again. If it burned up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved, though only as one escaping through the flames. So verse 15 once again confirms that we are God's true people if we're certainly saved. And that's not a question. So no one can snatch us or pluck us up out of the Father's hands if we are saved. And, we look at the useless things in our present lives, and we know that those things that we do physically that's not built on a good foundation will survive, even though we will. We, as God's spiritual beings, when that day comes, will always be who we are. Today, we will perish because we are built of physical material. Nothing lasts forever, and we know that. And we've heard many times that as men and human, we shall surely die after Adam and Eve did what they did. But anyway, going to John, just to give you an example of how if we maintain that course of certainty of salvation based on the true understanding of what God's light is, and I'll explain that. John 10, verse 28. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. And in Ephesians, if you will, Paul mentioned that the importance of what is true and right. And here's what he said about light. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 12 through 14. It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. This is why it is said, "Wake up, sleepers, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." So, once again, the correlation between physical darkness and spiritual darkness versus physical light and spiritual light. And it is mentioned many times that there will be times of darkness and strife, so we must continue to share with each other what is right so that we can reflect the light of Christ upon the darkness once again. We must share the good news of Christ and not be absorbed in our own selves. You know, when you're absorbed in your own selves, you know, you want to pass a message to someone, but that message is based on what you feel that you need to convey, not what you feel that needs to be conveyed on Christ's behalf. We have agendas as people. So it is He who is the light, and we must continue to introduce Christ into the world by serving and sharing all of this information and all of the light with others, right? So in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and I'll go into verse 5, "But what we preach is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servant for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' made His light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ." So all of these things is based on what God wants us to do on His behalf. And in verse 7, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us." So if we stand fast in what we understand and believe, you know, we can be that beacon of light in the darkness of this world. The idea is to keep God and Jesus as our focal points because they are our beginning and they are the creators of our light. So as darkness continues to surround us, we have to reflect the light of life because that is our future. And I say that, and then I'll go to Revelation chapter 22 and verse 4 through 6. Revelations 22, 4 through 6. It says, "They will see His face, and His name will be on their foreheads. There will be no more night. They will not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever." So, what does that mean, right? Jesus told His church that the overcomer would have His name written upon their foreheads. With His name, we shall be known to be His servants, as if His name was written and bored on our foreheads. It will be a clear case that we are the children of the people of God. We are now, but it is not fully known by others, right? At least not so known as it will be when He returns in the end. So I was reading from Revelations, and it tells us these things about it's being written on our foreheads. These are physical representations of what was shared and what was written at the time. You know, talking about the beast and the different powers. But then I'm going to skip down to verse 6 in chapter 4, verse 6 in chapter 22 of Revelations. And I'm going to read from there. "The angel said to me, 'These words are trustworthy and true. The Lord, the God who inspires the prophets, sent His angels to show His servants the things that must soon take place.'" I mentioned, the use of light light several times in that chapter, and actually throughout the different books that I read, I mentioned light, right? I don't want to get too far away from what the meaning of light is here, and I don't want to take it out of context, but I'd like to try something here. If we go back to all of those verses and we replace the word light with the word love, does it make sense? I want to, we should try that. And what if we considered the darkness just nothing bad but the lack of awareness? I want to do that. I just want to go back to one of the verses that I read. Let's see. Let's try one. Let's go back to John. John 12, verse 45 through verse 47. I'm going to replace the word light. The one who looks at me is seeing the one who sent me. I have come into the world as a love, so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. Or I can replace that with unawareness. Let's try one more. Let's go back. Let's go back to John 1. That was the first one I read after Genesis. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. As we continue that was not the one. I'm sorry, it's John 1:6. John 1:6, chapter 1, verse 6 through 8. There were a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that love, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the love. He came only as a witness to the love. So, what does that say? When we start witnessing and reflecting, we're reflecting what we see as, and it's explained as light, but it's that love that God had put over the face of the earth, because that was the first day, and he said it was good. So, in closing, as we continue to reflect that light or that love that Jesus shines in the darkness of the world, so that we can become that family in the end, let's continue to try or to make it part of who we are to move in a way that we remain a reflection of what God wants us to be, because we've been given a gift of understanding that God is love, as mentioned earlier, and as long as we are part of that family, that will reflect throughout the darkness or the lack of understanding of who God is. And those people that don't understand will be drawn to the light.